and did not come home. The weather is not ideal in London. The rain has just started at Whitehall. And perhaps a chance to reflect upon the conditions that the armed forces and civilian forces faced during the First World War, the Second World War, and many other conflicts since. Marching across is the Garrison Sergeant Major, who has been organising all the elements of remembrance here in London these last few days. Just before 11 o'clock today, the King will come with members of the royal family and will lead the nation. Watching are those people who take part in preparing this every year with some of the veterans who are unable to face the weather. And some of those who are gathered here are over 100 years old and took part in the Second World War as the mass bands begin their programme of music with Rule Britannia. The Director of Music, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Burringer, who is the commanding officer of the Household Division's bands. He will lead the music. He's guided by lights to get the timing exactly right. The hollow square that's created here by the armed forces. There are 800 overall from the armed forces and those civilian services that are taking part. The Royal Navy, the senior service, joined also by the Royal Marines, the Army, the Royal Air Force, the Police and the Merchant Navy. And to the right of our picture, we see the buglers of the Royal Marines and the trumpeters of the Royal Air Force, who will play respectively the last post and the rouse during the coming 2-minute silence. The Minstrel Boy was a song well known in Ireland, written by Thomas Moore, and it held in its own way an echo of those lands who we remember today. And Men of Harlech to remind us of Wales and Harlech Castle, which endured a 7-year siege, the longest siege of any in the United Kingdom between the years 1461 and 1468, echoing that great Welsh tradition. As the weather rolls in from the Atlantic, we recall that this is the 80th anniversary of the Battle of the Atlantic, probably the longest campaign in the Second World War. In it, 72,000 Royal Navy and Merchant Navy sailors were killed by drowning. 6,000 Royal Air Force Coast Command also lost their lives. And the United Kingdom lost 3,500 ships and 175 warships, trying to make sure that Britain did not starve. The Sky Boat Song, which takes us to the north and to the Highlands and out to the islands on the west coast. The pipes and drums of number 12 Company, Irish Guards. Also this year, we'll be recalling the 70th anniversary of the Korean War Armistice Agreement, and a reminder of so many veterans from that time who will be gathered watching and who will be remembering what was, to some extent, a forgotten war coming relatively soon after the great dramas and trials of the Second World War. We will also be recalling this year the 20th anniversary of operations in Iraq. And 80 years ago, the bravery of Op Chastise, which was the Royal Air Force's incredible operation to destroy the dams of the Rhine Valley, and known and remembered as the Dam Busters. The haunting tune there of Isle of Beauty, from which the phrase "Fare thee well" comes, as it now moves us back to Wales again with David of the White Rock. outside the lines of smartly dressed servicemen and women, and also those from the civil services, we see an enormous crowd of onlookers who have gathered here. Some of them queued very early this morning in order to get their picture of this scene with the Cenotaph at the centre, and where shortly we will see representatives of the Commonwealth, of the dependent territories, and of course of our own politicians, then to be joined by the King and the royal family. And on the side of the Cenotaph, the white ensign of the Royal Navy, the Union flag and the blue ensign of the auxiliary forces. But placed at the top, carved into the stone, is the empty tomb, the Cenotaph, where all of us can place our thoughts today. Flowers of the forest, which remind us of the Battle of Flodden, when so many Scots were killed in battle, and remembering all the souls that were lost in that battle back in the 16th century. Perhaps one of the most evocative of tunes played at the funeral of so many Scottish service men and women. The representatives of the Royal British Legion from different parts of the United Kingdom, from different services, who have organised this event, now take their place with all those who have gathered of the veterans. And it's a chance to follow them through to where an enormous phalanx of nearly 10,000 veterans have gathered today. They come from 304 armed forces and civil organisations, and for the first time this year, about 300 who don't have an organisation to march with, but who will be taking part anyway. Because for those who have served, or for the families of those who have served, the chance to march by the Cenotaph and pay respect is profound. Let us listen to the music of Elgar's Nimrod as we watch this scene prepare for the 2-minute silence. and all the way up to Trafalgar Square, the lines of the columns of veterans. They have come to pay their respect. They have lived through interesting times, and for them they bring in their minds the memories of so many who cannot be here today. And they bring those memories out of deep respect and a determination to always remember. It is also the 75th anniversary of the Windrush arrival, those who had served during World War II and who played their part in the protection of the United Kingdom and its then empire. As the Bishop's procession now leaves the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, the cross of the Chapels Royal, carried by Matt Davies, ten children of the Chapels Royal and 6 gentlemen of the Chapels Royal and their Director of Music. To the music When I Am Laid in Earth, from Dido's Lament by Purcell. The words, remember me, but oh, forget my fate. And marching to take their positions, the Major General commanding the Household Division, his Chief of Staff and aide-de-camp. Major General James Bowder, who is the Major General commanding the Household Division, his Chief of Staff, Colonel Guy Stone, whose brother works for Sky News and is currently covering the war in Gaza from Jerusalem, and the aide-de-camp, Captain Max Brewer. The First Aid Nursing Yeomanry, the women who did so much, particularly in the Second World War, the predecessors of these fine volunteers, particularly behind enemy lines with the Special Operations Unit, as the Prime Minister and the senior politicians take their position, with former Prime Ministers who gather here too. But it is on the shoulders of those who lead the political parties today that decisions on the use of armed forces around the world always rests, as this democracy has always insisted that it is through the parliamentary process that these decisions are taken. The Chief of the Defence Staff, the First Sea Lord, the Chief of the General Staff, and the Chief of the Air Staff, on whose shoulders rests the operational capability of the armed forces, and when told to carry out whatever military operation is required. And representing history, the representatives not only of Nepal and Ireland, but of all the Commonwealth, who in their different ways were affected by the First and Second World War and many conflicts since. And it will be their wreaths that will turn this Portland stone memorial into the red of memory through the poppies. And passing through the doors of the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, representatives from the wide range of different faiths throughout the United Kingdom who also come to take part in this service in the act of remembrance. And the Bishop of London waits to lead that service with the children of the Chapels Royal later on, as everything is set and the armed forces are brought to attention for the arrival of His Majesty the King and the royal family, and the Queen will appear at the balcony to look down upon this somber scene of reflection. She will be joined by the Princess of Wales, by the Duchess of Edinburgh and other members of the royal family as His Majesty the King now leaves to take his place by the Cenotaph. The King and the royal family have taken their places at the Cenotaph. His Majesty will lead the nation in the National Act of Remembrance. And a reminder that the Cenotaph represents an empty tomb, so that anyone, you, can place your thoughts in it during the 2-minute silence. Lieutenant Colonel Johnny Thompson presents to His Majesty the King's wreath, which is laid by him on behalf of the country. On behalf of Her Majesty the Queen, her wreath will be laid by her equerry, Major Ollie Plunkett. The Prince of Wales, with the 3 feathers of the heir apparent upon his wreath, lays it beside the King's and will also salute. Captain Christopher Brinkman of the Royal Wessex Yeomanry hands the Duke of Edinburgh his wreath. Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal receives hers from Commander Anne Sullivan. She has just taken on responsibility as President of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, which tends for eternity the graves and memorials of those who lost their lives in the First and Second World War and beyond. And on behalf of His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent, whose father was killed in the Second World War in an air accident in Sutherland in Scotland, Captain George Hopkins, his equerry, lays the wreath. And Major William Harris of the 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards will stand the parade at ease. And with the start of the Funeral March No. 1 in B-flat minor by Beethoven. His Majesty's the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Rishi Sunak, will lay his wreath. The leader of His Majesty's opposition and leader of the Labour Party, the Right Honourable Sir Keir Starmer, places his also beside the base of this remarkable memorial. On behalf of the Scottish National Party and Plaid Cymru Parliamentary Group, Mr. Stephen Flynn lays a wreath. the leader of the Liberal Democrats, the Right Honourable Sir Ed Davey. The leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, the Right Honourable Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. And on behalf of the House of Commons and all members of Parliament, the Speaker, the Right Honourable Sir Lindsay Hoyle. On behalf of all members of the House of Lords, the Lord Speaker, the Right Honourable the Lord McFall. And together, the Right Honourable James Cleverly, Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs, and the Right Honourable Suella Braverman, Secretary of State for the Home Department, will lay wreaths on behalf of the intelligence agencies. The overseas territories and crown dependencies will step forward to lay their wreaths. They represent the Bailiwick of Guernsey, the Bailiwick of Jersey, the Isle of Man, Anguilla, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, the Falkland Islands, Gibraltar, Montserrat, St. Helena, Ascension, and Tristan da Cunha, and Turks and Caicos. In this period of the wreath laying, we recall how far and wide was the reach of the First and Second World War, and how great the responsibility of those who had to fight for freedom in it. And the first of 5 groups to represent the Commonwealth, representing Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Ghana, and Malaysia. and along with them, Nigeria, Cyprus, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Uganda, and Kenya. And although not a part of the Commonwealth at the moment, we also recall those who lost their lives in these wars from Zimbabwe. The nations of Malawi, Malta, which won the George Cross from George VI for its bravery in the Second World War, Zambia, the Gambia, Singapore, a scene of such tremendous battles, for which many of the veterans are perhaps watching now, Guyana, Botswana, Lesotho, and Barbados. The steps of Lutyens' great memorial here in the centre of Whitehall, gradually filling with the memories of nations around the world. Mauritius, Eswatini, formerly Swaziland, Fiji, Bangladesh, the Bahamas, Grenada, Papua New Guinea, the Seychelles, Commonwealth of Dominica, St. Lucia and St. Vincent, and the Grenadines. The final group, 10 of the High Commissioners on the east side of this memorial, representing Belize, Antigua and Barbuda, the Maldives, St. Christopher and Nevis, Brunei Darussalam, Cameroon, Mozambique, Rwanda, Gabon and Togo. And representing the unique relationship that the United Kingdom has, the ambassadors of Ireland, our closest neighbour, and Nepal step forward, with all the associations with the Gurkhas who have for so long fought beside the armed forces of the United Kingdom in the pursuit of peace. The armed forces, led by the Chief of the Defence Staff, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, the First Sea Lord Sir Ben Key, Chief of the General Staff, General Sir Patrick Sanders, and the Chief of the Air Staff, Air Chief Marshal Sir Rich Knighton. 4 commanders who right now are involved with supporting some of the challenges that face our allies around the world. And on behalf of the civil services, Mr. Geoffrey Nutt for the Merchant Navy, who we recall with the Battle of the Atlantic, the Air Transport and Auxiliary Association, and the Civilian Services. The Lord Bishop of London.
O Almighty God, grant, we beseech thee, that we who here do honour to the memory of those who have died in the service of their country and of the Crown, may be so inspired by the spirit of their love and fortitude that, forgetting all selfish and unworthy motives, we may live only to thy glory and to the service of mankind. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
O God, our help in ages past.
Teach us, good Lord, to serve thee as thou deservest, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to speak for rest, to labour and not to ask for any award, save that of knowing that we do thy will. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Unto God's gracious mercy and protection we commit you. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you his peace this day and always. Amen.
The rouse will be followed by the national anthem, God Save the King. the salute, the King will take leave of this scene of national remembrance and lead the royal family back to the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Whenever a serviceman or woman is killed, either in active service or just in the passage of normal training, the King is always informed. Members of the royal family have associations with regiments, with squadrons, with ships, all across the globe as they serve. The chapels royal, led by the Sergeant of the Vestry and the Bishop of London, who is Dean of the Chapels Royal and the Sub-Dean, existed for medieval monarchs to take with them when they travelled away from the country in order to maintain their religious devotion. Henry V took the children of the Chapel Royal to the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. For the Prime Minister, and for all those who represent the principal parties of the United Kingdom in the House of Commons, the burden of whatever comes in the coming year sits heavy. And for Prime Ministers who in the past made decisions about sending service people to battle, their responsibility and reflection must also carry its own burden. Ministers and representatives of London, including the Mayor, filing back to their duties in Parliament and wherever they represent people, leaving the armed forces on duty to stand ready for whatever challenge may come. We have remembered them. And as time ticks by, the solid stone memorial that holds up the empty tomb remains at the heart of London life, remembered for its purpose today, always holding the thoughts of a nation from generation to generation. For the Chiefs of Staff of the Armed Forces, returning to their duties in the knowledge that up and down the country, sailors, soldiers, and aviators have played their part. The veterans have gathered, the cadets have played their part too in remembering. Shortly, the parade will be handed over to the Royal British Legion. And the veterans will have their chance to march past the memorial where those who lead our nation have paid their respect. The Major General commanding the Household Division, Major General James Bowder, his Chief of Staff, Colonel Guy Stone, and his aide-de-camp, Captain Max Brewer, leave the parade ground, which marks the end of His Majesty's parade. And the armed forces stand at ease. And stand easy. and the trumpet voluntary by Clark. And as this well-known tune rings out in Whitehall this morning, on behalf of the Royal British Legion, its President, Vice Admiral Sir Clive Johnson, takes his wreath and will step forward to place it at the Cenotaph. And he does so for all those who've been selling poppies in every town, city, and village and railway station and airport around the country. And one remembers the poppy factory, both in London and in Edinburgh, where veterans work throughout the year to prepare the poppies for the coming year, and what that represents in terms of supporting those veterans who have, for whatever reason, the need of that help. For the Royal Naval Association, shipmates Stanley, Keith, Ridley. The anchor that holds a ship in the windy turmoil of the sea, anchoring our thoughts for those who served in the Royal Navy today. For the Army Benevolent Fund, the Soldiers' Charity, General Sir James Everard lays his wreath. And for all those veterans who have kept the skies safe, particularly those still living from the Second World War, the Royal Air Forces Association, their wreath laid by Air Commodore Stu Stirrett. The Royal Commonwealth Ex-Services League, General Lord Richards of Hurstmanso, who was once Chief of the Defence Staff. Also played his part as Chief of the General Staff with many other very senior military appointments. He now sits in the House of Lords and represents many issues on behalf of the armed forces. Legion Scotland with the wreath marked by St Andrew's Cross, the Saltire, laid by Lieutenant Commander retired Martin Hawthorne. The memories of Scotland laid here at the steps of the Cenotaph. and remembering the impact of the Blitz upon London. For Transport for London, Wing Commander Brian Everett. And the use by so many people who lived in London of the underground system as a place to hide from the relentless bombing of the Blitz. But it has been a remarkable marking this year in the coronation year of His Majesty the King. Laura, you were there. How did it come across?
Well, I can say one thing, which is that the rain clouds have lifted now, and that has certainly lifted the mood of the thousands of people who are gathered here along Whitehall. This is a huge day, isn't it? Not just for the veterans here, but a very significant day for the royal family. Today we saw the King performing perhaps what is the most important duty in his calendar. Of course, he's been here for many, many years, but last year was his first as monarch. And again, this year, laying that wreath on behalf of the United Kingdom and the countries of the Commonwealth, as he is, of course, their Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. And I think you always get a sense, I think, of the moment, the significance. It's not lost on anyone here, and certainly looking at the faces of the members of the royal family who are here, the senior politicians, the dignitaries, that moment isn't lost on them. That moment, though, now over, and really, as the silence, the ceremony ends, you can hear the noise building along Whitehall now. That sea of umbrellas we saw earlier, all put to one side, because I think at the heart of today is very much the veterans. Nearly 10,000 are here. I mean, including, remarkably, a 100-year-old who will be marching with 9 D-Day veterans. He's Joe Randall, marching with the Spirit of Normandy Trust. An absolutely incredible moment for him and the other D-Day veterans, but for all the veterans here. And it was interesting, a little earlier I was speaking to some of the people who've gathered to watch the march past, many of whom are the significant others of those taking part. And one wife of someone in that march line up there was saying to me the moment her husband opened the envelope and realised he could take part a while back, she said tears formed in his eyes. This is an emotional day. It's an important day. I think it is the absolute recognition, I think, of service and, of course, of sacrifice too. And she said to me there will be a tear in her eye too as he walks towards the Cenotaph and salutes at the Cenotaph as well. It is a very moving scene here, but like I say, they've stood for a long time. The veterans here, the excitement, I think we can call it that, is now building. They are ready, raring to go for this moment, and it is an honour. There is a ballot to take part. Like I say, nearly 10,000 will be taking part, including 800 current serving members of the armed forces as well. And the crowds, 9-10 people deep either side of Whitehall, to watch this moment as well. And we've been reflecting as well as, along with the sombre remembrance here, there is a much tighter security presence too, but it has done little to deter the people coming. This is a safe area now for them to pay their respects. And these veterans now getting ready to do just that, as they will soon be walking past the Cenotaph. But it's been an incredibly busy time for the King as well, only just returned from his state visit to Kenya. And of course, next week, getting ready to celebrate his 75th birthday. On the day itself, he will be joined by others who are turning 75 this year for a tea dance at Highgrove. So from one state visit to a big ceremonial event to a big birthday celebration as well, a reminder that the royal calendar always busy, but this certainly, as I said, one of the most important duties of the King's year, Alistair.
And we've just seen the War Widows Association had their special white cross of chrysanthemums placed at the foot of the cenotaph. It always is very evocative to see that very simple white cross of chrysanthemums, and remembering all those widows who lost their husbands in battle. And it was in the 1970s that an Australian widow came over to the United Kingdom and campaigned for her war widow's pension to be tax-free like it is in Australia. And the War Widows Association gathered, and they have been permitted to place their very special and emotional wreath of chrysanthemums here. And it makes one think. Pipers of the Irish Guards are playing as we prepare now the columns of veterans who will march past. We saw some of the King's Scouts taking their position to support those members of the Royal British Legion who will be helping to move the enormous number of wreaths that will be passed to them by the passing, marching veterans. And they will all be placed as close as they can be to those of the Commonwealth, political, military, and royal wreaths, and that parade is about to begin. And with a salute to the fallen, the drum major leading the Coldstream Guards band, the Irish Guards in there too, with senior members of the Royal British Legion. A lot of removing of bowler hats and caps in salute with an eyes left. And at the head of Column A, the Gurkha Brigade Association, we saw the ambassador of Nepal laying a wreath, a recognition of the service, not only of them, but of the British Gurkha Welfare Society. I had the privilege of serving with the Gurkhas when they were with us down in the Falklands in 1982, and I've seen many Falklands medals amongst those marching beside the cenotaph just there. And then the Grenadier Guards Association, the Coldstream, Scots Guards, Irish Guards, Welsh Guards, and the London Regimental Association marching past. Very particular, the Royal Regiment of Scotland and its antecedent regiments march past giving their salute. And each of those medals tells an enormous story. And I'm sure many of those stories will be told later on when all these veterans get to the pubs of London. So amongst these groups, we've got the Royal Scots Regimental Association, the King's Own Scottish Borderers, the Black Watch Association, the King's Own Scottish Borderers, are joined by the Black Watch and the Queen's Own Highlanders, the Fraserburgh, Macduff and North East Gordon Highlanders. And as the music says, it is indeed a long way to Tipperary. And for those First World War veterans who formed this parade, many of these tunes marched them to the front and to the trenches and back again for a spot of leave in the long misery of the Great War. And at the front there, the London Scottish Regiment, wearing their hodden grey kilts. Scots who live in London and who find time to give of their service. The regiment has now been amalgamated into the Scots Guards. So these veterans will march past the Cenotaph into Parliament Square and return round to Horse Guards, where, on behalf of the King, the Princess Royal is waiting to receive their final salute before they complete their responsibilities here. And it's always good to see inn pensioners, as they're known, from the Royal Hospital at Chelsea. They're soldiers who hand over their pension, and they are looked after all their days in the Royal Hospital just by the River Thames. The Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment, the Queen's Regiment. We'll see the Fusilier Association go past shortly. Some of the associations are celebrating anniversaries. The Fleet Air Arm Jungly Association, it's their 10th year. RAF Linguists, it's their 25th anniversary. But the Royal Army Medical Corps is celebrating, for its association, 125 years. Meanwhile, the current generation of servicemen and women standing easy, holding their SA-80 rifles and watching the Royal Navy, the Royal Marines, the Royal Air Force on that side, and the Army and civilian organisations closer to our camera. So A42 there, that's the Durham Light Infantry Association. Followed by the Rifles and Royal Gloucestershire, Berkshire and Wiltshire Regimental Association. And plenty of green berries and side hats for the Rifles Light Infantry and King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry. But whilst the Army are coming past now, this march past is due to go on, I think, for some hours as we see the Royal Green Jackets pass by. The music from the musical Oh, 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 What a Lovely War, which was itself a reflection on the tragedies of the First World War, but one of the many songs that soldiers sang. And this one is as one staff officer jumped right over another staff officer's back. They were only playing leapfrog. You can imagine the humour of soldiers as they sang that. Blesma, who are the limbless ex-servicemen, the stories behind their loss of limbs, so painfully understood by their regiments and by all the charities that look after these fine veterans. And behind the mobility scooters, some with the ability to walk themselves and with their crutches too. And the inn pensioners of the Royal Hospital, Chelsea. Hundreds and hundreds of years of service represented by each of these wise faces and many stories as they turn their eyes, and some of them, with the help of their comrades, able to be here today. Following on behind the Royal Hospital, Chelsea, the Royal Star and Garter homes. As we see the King's wreath there with the black leaves, his racing colours of purple and red and gold. Fine black watch man there with his wreath ready to hand over, taken from him and will be placed with so many other memories on behalf of the Royal Star and Garter home. And many of those who are blind too, passing by, they turn their heads in salute to a cenotaph they cannot see. The Royal Army Ordnance Corps Association, the Life Guards, regimental home headquarters of the 1st, the Queen's Dragoon Guards. So plenty of cavalry swagger coming towards the cenotaph now. And on the side of the cenotaph you can see the Royal Air Force ensign with its light blue. It has the roundel in the fly. And on the other side of the Union flag, the red ensign, which reminds us of the 80th anniversary of the Battle of the Atlantic, when so many lost their lives to the submarine U-boat attacks that nearly starved everybody here in the United Kingdom. But eventually the Battle of the Atlantic was won. And so we've witnessed the nation come together here at the Cenotaph. We have seen His Majesty the King and the Queen and other members of the royal family place their wreaths after the 2-minute silence. Our political leaders from different parties have also taken part. And we've remembered the wide Commonwealth that shares so many of the stories of anguish of battle that these lands and islands have had to face. We've also seen the armed forces and their commanders here. But around this respectful scene, the armed forces of today, ready for duty, There, the Royal Marines with the Royal Navy. Watch as the veterans from previous years march past this cenotaph. And you've brought your memories. You have joined us here, and in your 2-minute silence, your treasures have been placed in that empty tomb as today's Chiefs of Staff of the Army, Navy and Air Force and Defence look on with their wives. But this is a time for the veterans, and London will be awash with these great stories and memories. And it echoes what's been happening the length and breadth of these islands as villages, towns and cities have stopped for 2 minutes. This is a ritual that seems to strike a chord, particularly with families who have memories to cherish and agony to address. But perhaps we should finish by contemplating what is in a soldier, a sailor, or an aviator's mind when they face danger. They want to protect what it is that their family represents, and we have remembered them.
This is Sky News Today. It's 12 o'clock. The headlines. Commemorating the war dead, the King leads the Remembrance service at the Cenotaph. The nation falls silent to honour those who've died in conflict. Also this hour, the Metropolitan Police says it's actively looking for individuals pictured carrying anti-Semitic placards at yesterday's pro-Palestinian march in London. The Shadow Home Secretary accuses Suella Braverman of deliberately inflaming tensions in the run-up to the Remembrance weekend.
I don't see how she can continue to do this job. She does not have the credibility or the authority to do the serious job of Home Secretary.
When I'm here next week, will the Home Secretary still be Home Secretary?
Well, look, as you know, and I know well, a week's a long time in politics, and I never make predictions about these things. As I say, it's entirely a matter for the Prime Minister.
Israel offers to evacuate babies from Gaza's largest hospital, where officials say 2 newborns have died after it ran out.
The Cenotaph, where they will salute. This very much their moment. It has also, of course, been a moment for the King too. Today, one of the, if not the most important duty of his calendar. He must lead the Remembrance Sunday service, and as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, that's what we saw him do, laying a wreath at the Cenotaph on behalf of the United Kingdom and the countries of the Commonwealth, joined by other senior royals here, the Prince of Wales. We saw Princess Anne as well, and the Duke of Edinburgh all laying wreaths here too. But now very much the turn of the veterans. Like I say, nearly 10,000 have gathered here, and speaking to some of their friends and family who are among the many, many thousands lining Whitehall today. This is such an important moment. One wife of somebody taking part said to me when her husband simply opened the envelope and realised he'd be out, he'd managed to get a place to take part, his eyes welled with tears. And she said today will be a moment of pride, but an emotional moment for her and her husband too. And I think that very much a sentiment reflected across those 10,000 veterans taking part. Alongside them, 800 serving members of the armed forces as well. Security has been incredibly tight. There's been this 24-hour police protection zone all around the Cenotaph and the surrounding roads as well, making sure that everyone here is safe, that they can be protected in this space, so they have the moment to reflect. But today, very much a moment to look back and remember service and sacrifice, to give thanks and to pay respects as well. And that's what we are seeing now today.
OK, Laura, for now, thanks very much indeed. Laura Bundock in central London for us. Well, joining me now from Edinburgh is Sky's royal commentator, Alistair Bruce, who's been following events at the Cenotaph from Scotland. And Alistair, of course, this was King Charles' first Remembrance Sunday as king. How did it go?
Well, it's the first one after his coronation, and I think it's been a big year for His Majesty, and also he will be 75 on Tuesday this coming week. And so, particularly after opening Parliament recently, all these great, almost constitutional duties, as Laura described it, have taken place. And it's really important for veterans and for the serving soldiers, sailors and aviators, and also to see the cadets up and down the country having their chance to come out and marking and keeping alive the idea of the armed forces in almost every community. But families are affected by war, and soldiers, sailors and aviators too. And this is one chance where the nation stops to reflect upon the cost of what we take for granted. And it has passed off beautifully in London, and it appeared to also in the principal capitals of the country. And I'm sure it did up and down the land. So I think for the King, who's led the nation here today, it will have been exactly as he would have wished. He gave the orders for how it should be taking place, and that has been delivered. And to see also the political leaders on whom the responsibility for going to war or military conflict of any kind rests, present too, and recognising the cost of the decisions that must be made to protect peace, is, I think, in its own way profound.
OK, Alistair, thanks very much indeed for your wonderful commentary and for that update. We can speak to our correspondent, Fraser Maud, as well, who's covering events for us in Rochdale today. Fraser, a very good afternoon to you. Certainly, there have been events held around the country and a certain incident in Rochdale which has drawn attention today.
Indeed, yes. Here in Rochdale, hundreds of people turned out for Remembrance Day, as they do every year. The Cenotaph here behind me, one of the very first to have been built in this country, designed by Sir Edward Lutyens, the same man who designed the Whitehall Cenotaph. And this, like so many across the country, funded and paid for by the local communities who lost so much, both in the Great War and, of course, in subsequent conflicts as well. A time for reflection, and given the events that are happening around the world at the moment, many people here saw it not only as a way to come together and remember the fallen, but also to hope for peace across the world. Ukraine, Gaza, so many conflict zones in the world at the moment, and people were hoping that by showing their solidarity, showing their remembrance, they were also showing solidarity for world peace as well. The incident that you mentioned here in Rochdale earlier on this week, on Monday, some poppies were taken from the Cenotaph. On Tuesday, some graffiti was sprayed on the Cenotaph. Free Palestine was sprayed on the base of the Cenotaph behind me. It was very quickly removed by local volunteers, and 2 arrests have been made. 2 teenagers have been arrested and charged with racially aggravated damage following that incident. Their identities, of course, because of their ages, cannot be released. But a few moments ago I was talking to Wing Commander David Forbes, who is the local president for the British Legion, who obviously plays such a vital role in the Remembrance Day services, and his view was that it was an unfortunate incident, something which he knows upset very many people. But equally, he said that many people died to allow people the right to protest, and that protest should be allowed. However, he said that there is a time and a place for protest, and that by putting slogans on a war memorial such as this, that was not the appropriate way to show support for any situation or any beliefs. He rolled with it, as you would say, and said that it was something that people should be allowed to do, to protest, but not necessarily by painting graffitied slogans onto war memorials like this. In terms of what happened here today, the rain came down just before 11 o'clock. It's very cold. It was very wet, and yet still hundreds of people impeccably observed the silence and were dignified very much throughout the whole service that took place here. We saw the dignitaries, saw representatives of the fire service, ambulance, police, prison service, members of the armed forces laying wreaths, along with the local dignitaries, politicians, members of all faiths. So it was a diverse crowd here in Rochdale today, as in so many places, towns, villages, cities across the country, people came to remember.
OK, Fraser, for now, thanks very much indeed. Fraser Maud there for us in Rochdale. Now, the Metropolitan Police is appealing for help identifying protesters holding hate crime placards during yesterday's pro-Palestinian march. Hundreds of thousands of people attended the demonstrations across London. A total of 126 arrests were made. Most were right-wing counter-protesters. Well, the police say that the march was largely peaceful, but they're now actively looking for individuals who were seen carrying a number of anti-Semitic placards. Well, joining me now is our correspondent, Milena Veselinovic. Milena, certainly there's been a lot of pressure on the police this weekend, and they've tweeted out a number of images of individuals they'd like to speak to.
Indeed, a huge policing operation with more than 1,800 officers on duty yesterday, drawn from forces from across England and Wales. And it continues into today as well, with 1,300 officers on duty as well. But what they say